Welcome back to our substance abuse videos, COVID-19 edition. As you know, we always start with our 5 deep breaths, so let's just get that out of the way first thing today, and then we'll get into today's topic, which is kind of how the patterns develop and how to shift out of those old patterns. So I call this, Who Are You Really? Or How to Grow Yourself Up. So that's where we're going to go with it today. Some of this material will also be covered in compassion power. We cover some of it in parenting too, because how you form in your family of origin is important. We'll also revisit some of it when we do the family stuff. So again, but it's a lot of good information today. I am using some notes just to help me keep these videos moving right along, since they're on such a little brief format compared to our usual classes where I get to, check out things with you and see, what people want more of or less of or whatever. So let's go ahead and start with our 5 deep breaths, and then we'll get going for today. So nice deep breath in. And out. The goal is to fill up your lungs totally. In. I'm not doing as well this time as you guys are, I hope. And out. Third one in. And out. And in. Out. And last one in. And out. So even though I do this frequently, some of those are harder for me. I think I kind of changed positions today to see if it could look like I was actually trying to look you guys straight in the eye. But I still like the plant there. My husband added this nice plant for me. He's much more of a photographer type. So just know it. Some days that'll go easy. Some days it'll be more difficult. Just keep doing it and give yourself a break when that happens. So for some people, like I said, who've taken compassion power, some of this is going to sound familiar. We might have some different terms in here, and we might put it together in a different way, because what we're looking at right now is the development of yourself, and also some on self-worth and self-esteem. It's not the full self-esteem lecture, but certainly that comes in there. So first of all, when you think about it, one thing we point out is that every single baby born, this is one thing that if you're going to have a sense of self-worth, and if you're going to have a sense that people can change and people can grow and that past mistakes can be worked through, part of it is that you have to have this, at least a grounding element, that it's not just fate. People are not born good or bad with nothing they can do about that. Because quite honestly, if some people were born good and some people were born as evil seeds and the script was already written, we would have no need for laws or classes or anything like that, because you couldn't change it. That's what we mean by that fatalistic viewpoint, that there is no changing it. So instead, we start with the basic assumption that every single person born has core worth, core value. And when I say core value, and I'll use core worth and core value and core self interchangeably, but when I say core value, the tricky part about that is when you hear core value, make sure you think of it as your worth, not your values. Because sometimes people confuse their value or their worth with their values. Like, I value, America, mom, and apple pie, or whatever. Those are beliefs. Those are cultural things. There's all kinds of things that could go into that. That has nothing to do with the fact that every single, see if you're holding the baby, they've got their little head right there, and you're looking in that baby's eyes, that every single baby born is valuable, worthy, lovable, important, powerful, all of these things just by nature of their being. You are a human being, right? So just by nature of their being, those are things that are yours at birth. They're your birthright. And you don't have to earn them. Think about babies. They don't have to like earn their lovability or earn their worth or earn their value, because they can't. They need care. And when we care for them, that's our human innate desire to bond and to connect and have compassion. And that is a human drive. Humans are hardwired for connection. So that baby doesn't have to earn its worth. It's worthy just because it is. And the truth is that part lives inside of you. And the example, and I know I used to teach this years ago, and I made a little handout, and I've seen it in other classes around the jail now, so it's kind of just infused the system. But if I had, see, I'm at home, I could like pull this out. But if I had, let's pretend, if I'm gonna pretend big, hey, if I'm pretending it's gonna be big. So if I had $100 bill, right? Nice picture of Benjamin in the middle. If I had $100 bill and it was crisp from the mint, that's like that new baby being born. It's easy to say. If we said, what's the worth of this bill? We would agree, $100. Don't get into inflation and, but it's not worth as much as it was in 1962 or whatever the deal is. But, its worth is $100. That's worth $100. Now, you're born all crisp and clean and people can kind of see that intrinsic worth. But on top of this core value, mismatches happen in life. And sometimes they're little mismatches or little hurts, little injuries, little chinks in the armor, and sometimes they're big, right? Big things would be trauma and abuse and all these kinds of things. And sometimes it's not just trauma and abuse where you're like, parents shouldn't do that. Sometimes the trauma that happens to kids is through no fault of anyone's. Say your child is born, like with a heart defect, and they have to do surgery on a young baby. Well, that's traumatic. Now, we know you're doing it to save the baby's life, but for a baby, that's experienced as, a body trauma. That, wow, people are invading my body and things are hurting and I don't always get to be with my parents. So core hurts can happen in a number of ways. But what happens is you've got this core value, and then the core hurts are like us wadding up this $100 bill. Now, if I wadded it up and held it up and I said to you, what's its value? What's its core worth? You'd say $100. Now, what if I threw it on the ground and stomped on it? What's its value? $100. Now, I might run it through the mud. I might run it over with the car. I might do all kinds of things to it. And if I asked you and said, what's its value? It's still got the core value of $100. The thing is, though, you might walk by it on the street and think it's trash, right? It's in the gutter. It's muddy. It's dirty. It's torn. That core worth can be hit with all these core injuries, these core hurts, and that can cover up that connection with core worth. So the core worth is still there, but you can't always see it. And sometimes that is that other people can't see it. But if those things happen to us when we're growing up, we stop connecting with our core value. We forget what we're worth inside, because what we're seeing instead is that crumpled, ripped up, muddied, run through the gutter $100 bill. The process of healing is like one saying, hey, there's value in there, and picking that thing up and realizing all the traumas that happen to it and figuring out ways to do some healing. So that might mean washing it off, smoothing it out, taping it. Might mean putting it through the washing machine. It might be ironing it, right? We might do all of these things to have that core worth come into that place of prominence again, where we can clearly see that core worth. And that's that process of recovery, is reconnecting with your core worth, with your core value self. So I hope that makes sense, because we all start there. Here's the thing that happens though. So as all these core injuries are building up and we're getting out of touch with our core value, what we start to get in touch with instead, what we start to do instead, is we build this protective wall. We build this protective wall because we're tired of getting hurt. And this protective wall, unlike a good boundary, which we'll talk about in a bit today, unlike a really functional boundary, this becomes a wall of fake self-image, a wall of your fake self, the thing you want to present to the world. Now, for some people, I mean, that's your public persona, right? You know, you look a certain way on the streets, you look a certain way when you're with certain people. It's kind of like, it's often this, you know, I call people the poser pod or something, but it can be that thing. It's like, here's my fake image that's meant to protect that tender part of me that still really is in there and it's been hurt a lot and is really reactive, and I don't want anyone to get close to it. So we have that core value self, we have these core hurts coming in, and then we have this false self that's built initially as a protection, right? So it's, the motivation is good. Remember that people develop these patterns not just because, hey, I want to be screwed up. They develop the patterns because they're reacting to what's going on around them. And kids, remember we have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Kids often don't have the fight or flight option, right? They can't get out of the dangerous system. They can't, whether that dangerous system is their home, they're, you know, being picked on at school, they've got church telling them things about themselves, you know, some real judgmental churches, if there's, you know, not going to one that's real loving. It can be their community, there can be judgment in the community. Whatever the deal is, the culture at large, you know, the advertisers love to tell us everything that could possibly be wrong with us. So you build this false self to protect your real self, but after a while, you kind of forget that there's something deeper. So you're really a shell, right? You feel like this shell, you don't know who you are, and you can never have genuine self-esteem if you don't reconnect with your core value self, with your core worth, because that's where self-esteem comes from. So, core value self, core hurts, abuse, and neglect happen. Little word about neglect. Neglected kids actually often fare worse than abused kids. Now, obviously, the extreme form of abuse is death, and you can't come back from that. But I'm not saying abuse is okay. Not at all. But abused kids, sometimes, at least there are periods of time where between the abuse incidents, there might be some actual attention paid to them by the parents and stuff. Kids who are really neglected, the message they get is, you're not even worthy of the attention it takes to abuse you. You don't even matter enough for me to spend my energy or my time. What it says to the kid is, I don't even recognize your existence. You are so invisible. So neglected kids often show up worse later on than abused kids. And abused kids often have a sense of, because neglected kids sometimes feel like, well, my parents didn't really do anything that bad, or people at school didn't do anything that bad. You know, so what if my teacher didn't learn my name through the whole first grade or whatever? But there's that sense of, wow, I didn't even get seen as a person, right? I matter so little. So that's why sometimes that can be even worse. So you get what's called this false self, your false image self, your fake self. It's also called by some people the adaptive child, meaning not the natural child that's growing up and learning and accepting themselves for who they are and all those kinds of things, but this is the reactive adaptive child who says, I'm going to get into some behavior patterns because that's what it takes to survive. So they get some crazy behaviors to go with the crazy situation. And those things keep them from getting what they want later, keep us from getting what we want later, because we all have some of these things. If you don't do anything about, what you get is an immature adult. So what you get is really the reactive child in the body of an adult. So now I'm going to use my 2-year-old coping mechanisms or my 5-year-old coping mechanisms. I'm going to throw a fit when I don't get my way. I'm going to be reactive. I'm going to, all those kinds of things, throw the tantrum. And with an immature adult, you have difficulty relating to yourself, difficulty relating to others, and it can lead to a lot of different problems, including, guess what we're talking about in here? Addictions, right? Because see, if I don't feel good about myself and I don't know how to really get in touch with my core self, and I don't feel good and I want to feel different, or I want to escape, what can I do? I'll develop this coping mechanism of a distraction, an addiction, etc. So it will take decision and effort to examine those old patterns of yours, to realistically look at your history, and then to make a decision, I'm going to change the pattern. And people sometimes think, well, I've decided I'm going to change the pattern. And they know in their head they want to, because most of us thought of kids. If things were happening to us as kids that we generally felt were not good, we used to say to ourselves as kids, see if this sounds familiar, Well, when I get big, I'm never gonna fill in the blank, right? When I'm a mom, when I'm a dad, I'm not gonna. See, our kids kind of know sometimes, like, when things are going wrong, they kind of get it, like, something's not right about this, but I'm not in a position of power to change it now. By the time we're adults, we've often made excuses for that behavior, we've often rationalized that behavior, and a lot of times we've identified with that behavior. One way of staying, say, you don't have a good bond with a parent. One way of bonding with that parent is to become like that parent. So it's called bonding by identification. So maybe you said, like, oh my gosh, when I grow up, I'm not going to be like my mom. But then you realize when you're older, you become more and more like your mom. And part of it's because you're still working so hard to win her love, right? That you'll make excuses for her, and that you'll even, she did that to me and I turned out okay, or whatever the deal is. So it takes decision and effort to examine and change these patterns, because what we want to become is a mature, functional adult. Now, maturity does not mean somber. We're not talking become an adult and always do everything right, because in fact, some people are too tightly wound. They're almost super responsible, and they can never relax, and they can never play, and they can never enjoy the flexibility that comes with relationships and with raising children and with adapting to new circumstances, like this whole COVID-19 thing, or with a new job, or with a shift in opinions, where you realize, wow, something I've believed for all this time, or I always thought was true, it's not really realistic, right? Like think about when they thought the earth was flat, and then all of a sudden people started to, do the ships, and they realized we can sail around the world, and then they had to go like, wow, it always looks flat to me, so I assumed it was flat, but wow, now I know the earth is not flat, especially after we have this pictures from space, and you see the globe right there, the big blue marble. So, and one thing is that children cannot create mature capacities by themselves. That's why kids have parents, right? They start in a very dependent state. And remember, there's that dependence and that need for connection, and that always comes first in a child's life, because without connection, kids die. We have helpless young, they cannot live on their own. Check my time. So, connection comes first. But then kids have this sense of they want to be themselves, they want that autonomy. And they need, what the goal is to have loving adults around them who will provide what I call this empathetic envelope, right? It's loving firmness, that you have lots of love, and in here we talk about the skill of love being empathy. So applied love, empathy as a skill, empathy as an action, empathy as something that you can learn, you can be taught, and you can learn. If you didn't get it, don't worry. It's not like, well, I missed the boat. I wasn't born with empathy. I can't get empathy. No, empathy is something that can be developed. And in fact, that whole idea of I can learn new things gives you great creativity. It gives you great courage. And someone who will not be taught, someone who's like, nope, you can't teach me a thing, is actually showing their pridefulness, right? They're showing that pridefulness and that rigidity, and actually their insecurity, because secure people know there's always new things to learn. And also, when you make yourself teachable, when you're open to being taught, even by your kids, right? Your kids will teach you some things. When you're open to being teachable, that shows your genuine pride, and it also shows your humility. So when we talk about that humbleness, or that humility, or that willingness, and that generosity of spirit, part of that comes from, hey, I can learn new things. I can practice new things, and I can do hard things. And learning new things will take effort. And there's a difference between a wish and effort. A wish is, man, I wish I had more patience. The effort is, I'm going to put myself in situations where I don't get things instantly, and even though it's going to drive me crazy, I'm going to talk myself through it. I'm going to get support through it. I'm going to tell people how much this drives me crazy, and I'm still going to do the work it takes, right? The difference between sitting on the couch, watching the DVD, the exercise DVD, and getting your butt up off the couch and doing the exercises. You will not get the results if all you're doing is trying. Well, I'm trying, I'm watching the videos. Not the same as I'm doing. even though I might not do it perfectly. And believe me, if you ever saw me at Zumba, you would know I do not do it perfectly. And remember that there is a draw toward what we know, that we want to go back to familiar patterns, and that will happen unless we actively change the steps of the dance. So if you have a diabolical home life, and then you're like, why do I keep picking these partners who I repeat these patterns with? Because you will repeat until you figure out new steps of the dance. And one thing we know is that when there's like a tragedy that goes on, like a big disaster or whatever, people tend to run home. That animal instinct to run home in the face of some kind of danger happens, even if home was not the best place to be, right? So you have to actively change that, because people be like, yeah, no, it's crappy, but it's the crappy I know instead of the crappy I don't know, right? Because change is scary for people. And once the adaptive child takes over, when you're adult and that reactive child takes over, those not so good coping strategies, that's a losing strategy, because children often will just, fight and stick in there and throw tantrums and do things that they developed out of a dysfunctional system, and now they're trying to use it in an adult relationship, and it's not going to get you what you want. So do I want to be a winner or a loser? Do I want strategies that work, or strategies that repeat my old losses? This is a quote: "There is nothing harshness does that loving kindness can't do better." Tell me what you think about that when I see you again. So, and we may need help to see ourselves in our patterns and to identify and practice new behaviors and perspectives. So that's that thing with, if you're like, but I don't know how to do this, Darla. This was never taught to me. I have no idea. It's okay to ask for help. If you don't know, if you don't know how to do something, you hire someone who does. And I always think about sports teams. I mean, these people are like a lot of times at the top of their game. Now, if they were playing right now, like Nolan Arenado and stuff, he's really great at what he does, but he still has coaches, right? He still has hitting coaches, and they still do batting practice, and they still have defensive coaches and all that, because you can still learn things from other people. So learning something is not a bad thing, and asking for help is not a bad thing. And sometimes the people you can ask for help are the people close to you. Your kids might have some really valuable information. Your spouse or your friends or the people in your recovery group might have some really good input about some of those patterns and how you might change them. Like, wow, I notice every time you get nervous, you kind of start laughing. Seems like you use laughter as a way to kind of, deal with that hurt. I'm wondering what it would be like to sit with that hurt for a little bit, right? Or something like that. So, now, I want to go through 5 core self-skills. We're going to go through these, and then we're probably going to run another video on them too, because I don't know how many we'll get through. So this might actually be a longer video. Maybe we'll do a little longer video. But these are 5 core self-skills, and this comes from Pia Melody. She kind of originated this idea. Terry Real expanded into the relationship realm, and I've also combined it with the work of Stephen Stosny and a lot of things just that are Darla. So this is kind of a combination, but I want to give credit to sources of some people that if you want to read some books, those would be good ones to read, and I'll try to get a hold of some of those too. So core self-skill number 1, self-esteem. I would also call that self-worth. And self-esteem means holding yourself in warm regard despite your imperfections and limitations. Because you are human, you are imperfect, you have limits, we all do. But it's holding yourself and then holding others later on. But first it comes to the self. Holding yourself in warm regard despite those things. Okay? So to know that I am valuable, worthy, lovable, important at the level of my very being, even though I have some imperfections and some behaviors that need to change. So you can accept yourself while still holding yourself accountable for your behaviors. Now, if you don't deal with self-esteem in a healthy way, the dysfunction you get is shame and grandiosity. And here's the thing, some people go real into the shame, right? Something is inherently wrong with me. I am bad at my core, and I need to keep that secret. Some people, to deal with shame, then flip into, oh, I feel the shame. Shame feels horrible. Then I flip into grandiosity. Now I'm going to just like be all blustery and puffed up. This is the pridefulness piece, right? I'm going to, show that, well, no, no, you're not going to make me feel bad. And what about you? And it gets real defensive. And often that's, again, that there's, very thin paper that doesn't have two sides. Often people will flip from shame to grandiosity, from grandiosity to shame. And when you're in that shame and grandiosity dance, this is what we call a one up, one down. I'm either one up, I'm better than you, look at what you do, or I'm one down. Oh my God, I know, it's all me, I'm terrible. That's the flip side of grandiosity. So people often flip between those. The hard part is to get to a point where you're like, wow, what's the healthy adult part, the functional, mature adult part, the grown-up part, is to be able to hold both of those truths at the same time. I am a loving, lovable, valuable, worthy, important, powerful person, even with my imperfections. And I can hold myself accountable for my behaviors and still know the truth about me at my core. So that thing we talked last time, like the POS, instead of, you do something wrong and you say, well, that was a shitty behavior. You can say, well, that was a shitty behavior. I feel guilty. Guilt says, fix it, repair it, make it better, heal it. And I go into doing things that will repair it, right? That's different than, I did a crappy behavior. Should use a good language this time of the week, right? I did a crappy behavior. That means I am a piece of crap. That's that shame piece. What tends to happen with shame is we don't like shame. Like I said, we either go into grandiosity and arrogance, and then sometimes we often get into shame leads to blame. Now I'm going to project it all out there on other people. Well, yeah, but I may be bad, but I'm not as bad as that guy. Yeah, I did this, but what about the time you did that? A lot of whataboutism and those kinds of things. So shame and blame, we want to get out of that shame-blame cycle. Claim the guilt that is ours, because guilt we can work with. Guilt's a healthy thing. Now, when a parent can hold this child in this warm place despite their imperfections, what the child sees is, hey, I am valuable, worthy, lovable, and important, all those things, and I'm cherished as a human being. And even though I get corrected sometimes and I have consequences to my behaviors, they're not taking it out on me. I'm not a bad boy or a bad girl. And so kid gets the sense of self-worth. Now, if you get false self-esteem, a lot of families are like, no, but shame motivates them to do better and all this. False self-esteem often looks like a list of what I did or what I have instead of who I am. So when we think about this, and false self-esteem, there's some that are like these entitled people, and they've been given the image that kind of everything I do is perfect. And this was kind of promoted. It started in California. I know it hit Boulder, it hit Denver, all those kinds of things where we're just going to, everything you do is perfect. And then the kid will get this self-esteem and then they'll do better. Well, if they got that, you're so great, you're so great, you're so great, without making any effort, it actually is a very falsely inflated sense of self-esteem, because you need the effort and you need the overcoming of things to build that genuine self-esteem. So genuine self-esteem, parent says to the kid, kid kind of half-asses an assignment or something, and the parent says, wow, you know what, you're a really smart kid, and usually you work pretty hard, but I didn't see you put a lot of effort into that. How about you try it again? But it's good, right? It's good. Well, you know what? Actually, I didn't see much effort. But then you see a kid working really hard on something and you praise that effort. Wow. Yeah, I see how hard you're working on that. Yeah, that's good. And they get frustrated to the point where it's about to put them over the edge. And you say, that is frustrating. Would you like some help? And you offer to help them, but you don't rescue them, right? You help them through that struggle. Kind of like when your kid learns to walk. Now, think about, when you guys come into my room, there's usually a few of you rolling in, a couple of you rolling in wheelchairs lately, but because you've gotten some injuries or whatever. But most of you have walked. And how did you learn to walk? By falling down. See, if your parents had said, oh, no, it's good enough if you never walk, or they, every time you start to get up, they're like, no, you might fall, and they did it for you, you would never have learned to walk. So you had to fall down to walk. And hopefully you had parents who supported that, like, oh, yeah, oh, ow, that hurt a little. Yeah, there you go, you got it, right? And through all those adjustments, you build that strength. You build that resilience. So that's different than the false self-esteem. Now, sometimes people feel like they're polishing an empty shell. right? So what I'm trying to do is project on the outside so that people think I'm successful. They think this is that I gotta look good thing. The hard part is that doesn't feel very solid, because you're like, well, what looks good in one group won't look good in another group. Or what if your false polish is your looks? And our culture values youth, right? Youth and good looks. Well, as you get older, I don't care how good looking you are, you're going to get some wrinkles. You're going to get some sagging. You're going to get gravity, right? So then what happens to your self-worth once age happens, right? So if it's based on something superficial, it's very fleeting and it will fall apart. So you can have that false, overly inflated self-esteem, but you can also have what we call this comparative or hierarchical self-esteem. Hierarchical just means we rank people, and this is one up, one down, right? We've talked about that. One up, one down. So how people feel good about themselves is, if I can, the comparative type is the one where if I can find people beneath me, then I can feel better about myself because I'm one up. So this might be like, hey, well, I could say like, hey, I'm going to call myself middle-aged and not old. I may be middle-aged, but at least I'm not wearing stripes. And you guys might be in the jail saying, well, I may be an inmate, but at least I don't have as much gray hair as you, right? Or people will compare houses or cars, or how soon their kid was potty trained, or do they have the newest iPhone, or all those things. Those are the comparative. Those are false self-esteem that are based on, if I can find people beneath me, I can feel better about myself. One up, one down. The problem with one up, one down is, if you're one up now, you'll flip to one down at some point. My favorite example for this now is Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, right? I used to say like Bill Gates, Bill Gates, like rich, and if he was into comparative self-esteem, he'd go like, yep, I feel pretty good about myself because look at all these other people less than me. Well, one, he and Belinda Gates started giving, I can't remember, I think it's Melinda Gates actually, started giving away a bunch of their money as part of their legacy. They still got a ton, don't feel sorry for him. But they start doing that. Plus, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, making a ton of money. So now they're both from Seattle, right? Bill Gates used to feel really good if he's doing the one up, one down thing. You feel like, yep, me, I'm top of the world, I make all this money, ha ha ha. And then all of a sudden he's like, crap, Jeff Bezos has more than I do, right? Now his self-esteem is going to be low because he's basing it on what he has, rather than who he is. Because at his core, Bill Gates is just as good as, but not better than, every baby born on this earth. Same with Jeff Bezos, right? So that's that comparative self-esteem. Now some people take it even further than that. And I used to have a friend who said Southern women were the best at this. And this is called predatory self-esteem. Now predatory self-esteem is not just, I'm going to look and see who's underneath me and compare to make myself feel better. This is, I'm going to put people down so they're beneath me so I feel better. Now the reason my friend said women from the South are best at this is because they have a little phrase called, bless your heart. So you could say something, like, oh, put on a few pounds, bless your heart. Or, oh, you still don't have any grandchildren, bless your heart. Or, oh, wow, your little house is so cute. Oh my gosh, my house is so big, I just could not clean it all myself. But a little house like this, I can just clean it in no time, right? Whatever the deal is. And the teenage way of doing this is JK, right? They'll say something really insulting and then they'll say, just kidding. Or, can't take a joke, right? And it's like, no, there was passive aggressive stuff in there. You were kind of putting me down to get a little bit of false self-esteem. But then when I call you on it, you're like, I'm just kidding, right? So that's that kind of, that's called predatory self-esteem. And in abusive families, we find this used a lot. And actually, if you take self-esteem inventories, I'm going to wrap this one up quickly here because I've gone over. But if you take self-esteem inventories in abusive families, at the beginning, abusers will test artificially high on the self-esteem scale, and the rest of the people in the family test low. And that's because they're getting put down to keep them in their place. That's why isolation and all of that is so important. But what happens is if these people get empowered and start having their own sense of self-esteem, and that's why this person don't want them to go to treatment a lot, boom, there's plummets. This is the good point, though. If the abuser plummets down here, that's often where they're motivated to get some help because That's the thing that can make a difference. Even people who've been abusive can build their genuine self-esteem. So we're going to stop for today. When I start the next part of this tape on core value self, building yourself, I'm not going to do the 5 deep breaths. So we'll try to play these two in close proximity to each other. See you soon.